Welcome to the first installment in my CISA exam prep series. Over the next 10 installments, this journey will break down every topic on the official ISACA CISA exam syllabus. It's designed so aspiring auditors can master every domain in the syllabus and enter that exam room with clarity and confidence. In this opening video, Domain 1, Part A, the focus is all about information security audit planning. So why does planning matter? Well, because every successful audit rests on a foundation of purpose, process, and standards supported by the risk-based assessment focus of a competent information security auditor. We'll unpack all these principles along with the important elements of controls from an auditor perspective. Your journey to CISA exam readiness begins right here, and we'll do it in the no-nonsense way we approach every exam preparation series here on Inside Cloud and Security. Let's dig in. Welcome to the ISACA Certified Information Security Auditor Exam Prep Series. Today we're focused on Domain 1 Part A, so Domain 1 being Information Systems Auditing Process. And while you may know me from my exam prep content here on YouTube, in my 9 to 5 I'm a cybersecurity strategist and a VCSO for a regional bank where I'm exercising my cybersecurity knowledge every day, like that which you'll find here on the CISM exam. More importantly, last year I helped thousands achieve cybersecurity certifications, like the CISSP, CCSP, and the Security Plus exams, and I'm bringing that proven formula to you here with the CISM exam. As with all my exam prep courses, you'll find a PDF copy of this presentation available for you in the video description to leverage in your exam preparation as you require. You'll also find a clickable table of contents available in the video description, and it should appear automatically on your YouTube video timeline. So on the weighting system, Domain 1 is about 1/5 of the full content of the exam, a little bit less, but the information here is foundational. You're going to leverage this throughout the 5 domains, so it's especially important, conceptually speaking. This series covers all 5 domains. We'll talk through every topic on the official exam syllabus. We're going end to end. But I've divided each domain into a Part A and a Part B, just like we see in the official exam syllabus. Today, as you might gather, we're focused on Domain 1, Part A. So let's talk about your exam prep strategy. Many people mistakenly believe they're simply a visual or tactile or auditory learner. The research now shows that everyone benefits from a variety of sources. So multiple sources are a great idea, just don't overdo it from a budgetary perspective. I like to start by mixing and matching, beginning with video content, and then I'll review perhaps PowerPoint or a PDF that goes along with that lesson. I like flashcards, but a live quiz is even better. If I can put a PDF file in my partner's hands and let them quiz me, because they can ask about different topics in different ways. That's a great substitute for flashcards. And practice exams are really going to test your knowledge and gauge your readiness along the way. But practice time management in these sessions as well, and I'll explain how in a minute. And then targeted reading makes sense. And this is for closing knowledge gaps, not cover-to-cover reading. I'll talk to you about the books you should have, but just know you're not going to sit down for days or weeks reading cover to cover for this exam. But multiple resources of each type are a great idea. Just don't break your budget doing it. There's certainly such a thing as material overload. One book I strongly recommend is coming at the end of September 2025. That is my CISA The Last Mile. That will be available on LeanPub for about $10 US, but it covers every topic on the exam better than 300 pages of content there. So let's talk about the other book I recommend, and that is the official review manual from ISACA. However, I recommend you pick it up from Amazon because it's going to be less expensive, even if you're an ISACA member. In terms of practice questions, which are very important to gauge your readiness and your knowledge, I suggest Pocket Prep, which comes with 1,200 questions, many 5-star reviews. I believe it's more than enough for this exam, and at around $21, $22 a month, it's much less expensive than the questions, answers, and explanations database from ISACA, which comes in at $300 to $400, depending on your membership status. I don't think that it makes a $300 to $400 difference, frankly, in terms of what it brings you for exam readiness. So just bear that in mind. There's no need to overdo it when it comes to the questions. Now let's talk about how you can use the practice quizzes to assess your exam readiness. I believe on a quiz bank like ISACA with Pocket Prep, if you're scoring around 80%, that's going to be a strong indicator that you are ready for the exam. And I mean 80% across each of the 5 domains. And Pocket Prep makes it very easy for you to break your quizzing up by domain and even topic and drilling down on your weak topics. I quite like them for that. But I also want to talk to you about time management. So on exam day, time management can be a make or break proposition. On this exam, you're going to have 4 hours to complete 150 questions. That's a little more than 90 seconds a question, a minute and a half per. There are free timers out there to help you practice your time management. I'll throw those in the video description so you can grab one if you like. And using something like Pocket Prep, you can just gauge your ability to read and answer a question within a minute and a half. And if you do that during your practice quizzes, it should be automatic on exam day. And that's very important. You don't want to fail this exam because you don't get through all the questions. All right, let's look at the syllabus for Part A of Domain 1. So we first have Information Security Audit Standards, Guidelines, and Code of Ethics, followed by Types of Audits, Assessments, and Reviews, then Risk-Based Auditing, and finally, the 4 types of controls and considerations. So we will begin with Part 1, and the first topic I'd like to talk about is your role as an auditor. The auditor is a strategic partner to the enterprise, and every question you answer on this exam needs to be answered through the lens of the information security auditor and their role in this relationship. Your core mission is to evaluate and improve risk management, control, and governance processes. So the auditor's mindset, very important. You're objective and you are independent of the organization. We focus on business risk and value. We always put the business first. We are always unbiased and objective in our opinions, and we demonstrate independence from our sponsor within the organization who's paying our bill. And we need a systematic and disciplined approach. We need to go through a repeatable process so we can produce predictable and reliable results. And just to establish context, we said in Domain 1 Part A we're focused on planning. It's about 1/5 of the exam content, give or take. But in the entire audit lifecycle, planning is where it begins. That's where we're focused today. Then we'll move into execution and reporting and follow-up. So it will follow a very natural progression from beginning to end of the audit process through this series. But again, the principles from Domain 1 are foundational, so they will appear throughout questions across all other domains. So if you don't know Domain 1 very well, if you don't understand it, the entire exam is going to be quite challenging. So let's talk about the criticality of the planning phase. Why is planning so important? Well, it ensures audit efficiency and effectiveness. It directs resources to the areas of greatest risk. As an auditor, we have a risk-based focus, and it maximizes the value and the impact of the audit. We plan the audit, we get the scope right, and we focus on areas of greatest risk, so we're delivering maximum value. If we don't plan, if it's a by the seat of your pants type operation, we're going to waste resources and time. We're going to focus on areas that are low value, potentially low risk. We might overlook critical risks in the process, and we deliver an audit that fails to provide meaningful assurance. So let's talk about Information Security Audit Standard, Guidelines, and the Code of Ethics, the ISACA Code of Ethics. The key framework we're working with is ISACA's IT Assurance Framework. The purpose is to ensure consistency, quality, and professionalism in auditing. And adherence to the ISACA standards is mandatory for CISA certification holders. So let's talk about your authority to audit, which is granted through the Audit Charter. It outlines the overall authority, scope, and responsibilities of the audit function. So the content will include the mission, the independence, and the access rights of the audit team. It's going to be in writing. It has to be approved by the highest level of governance within the organization. That would be the audit committee, the board of directors, or senior management. But for the exam, note that the Audit Charter is the foundational document that grants the audit function its power and legitimacy. Without this formal approval, the audit lacks authority. It may mean that if we don't have authority, it may mean that management ignores the results. So we need that executive level formal approval. So let's talk for a moment about the IT assurance framework hierarchy. So we have standards. Standards are mandatory requirements. They specify a minimum level of acceptable performance. Then we have guidelines, which are non-mandatory, also known as optional. Guidelines provide that optional direction on how to implement the standards. And then the tools and techniques. These are the practical how-to examples. These would include checklists and audit programs. For the exam, know that you must follow standards. You should consider guidelines, but you can deviate with your professional judgment and justification for why you deviated. Maybe the situation requires a more effective but different path of action, and as long as you can explain that, deviating from guidelines would be deemed acceptable. So let's talk about ITAF standards and categories. So the general standards define the who. They define the attributes of the auditor and the audit function, such as ethics, independence, and competence. Then we have performance standards. This is the how. This defines the nature of the audit work itself. Planning, risk assessment, collecting evidence. And then we have the reporting standards, the what. This defines the nature and content of the audit report. Communication of the results, findings, and recommendations, understanding that these results are going to be delivered to multiple audiences, and what makes an effective report will be different for executive level stakeholders versus IT stakeholders who may have to remediate findings in that audit report. Let's talk about the ISACA Code of Professional Ethics, which is a non-negotiable requirement for all CISA certification holders. So it functions as a primary administrative control for the profession. It mitigates the risk of audit failure, and it protects the profession's reputation. A few principles you'll find in here. Supporting standards, those mandatory specifications. Objectivity and due care, that we are taking reasonable precautions that a normal person would take, that we are objective, we are unbiased in our assessment. We serve our stakeholders lawfully. So some of these you can see are purely common sense. We maintain confidentiality. We never reveal sensitive company information outside the organization without reason and their permission. We maintain competency, which means continuing education, those CPEs we complete to maintain our competence, keeping our knowledge up to date. We inform appropriate parties. So when we have an audit finding, we make sure we're notifying the appropriate stakeholders to ensure that any critical findings are addressed and everyone is properly informed in the context of their role. And we support professional education. So on the exam, you're not going to be tested on these directly. You will see them incorporated into questions where you will need to understand how they apply. I think if you breeze through the Code of Professional Ethics one time, you will find that they are largely common sense of any security professional, and you won't think much more about them. So enforcing the code. How does ISACA handle the complaint process? Well, failure to comply can result in an investigation and disciplinary measures. ISACA does have a formal complaint process for alleged violations, and punishments can be severe. Potential sanctions include reprimand, suspension of membership or certification, or revocation of your CISA certification altogether. But again, that code of ethics, it has real teeth. It's not just a guideline. It's an enforceable set of rules that protects the integrity of the CISA designation. But again, you're not going to be tested directly on the exam, but indirectly it will be a consideration in decisions around certain scenario-based questions. So definitely read through them one time and make sure that they are known to you and the common sense that I believe them to be. So let's talk about management of the audit function. So leadership is absolutely critical. It has to be managed to fulfill its objectives while preserving independence and competence. So resource management. Auditors have to maintain competency through continuous training on new technologies and audit techniques, unsurprising. Tools. Management has to provide the necessary resources, like computer-assisted audit techniques for specialized audits. And there may be a need for experts. So auditors may themselves engage external experts for highly specialized areas, like digital forensics or industry-specific regulations. I definitely see specialists step in when we're dealing with something like PCI DSS in the credit card processing space or HIPAA in the healthcare space. Responsibility. The auditor must assess the expert's competence and independence and supervise their work because, and this is important, the ultimate liability for the audit opinion is not delegated to that expert. It still lies with the auditor. They are accountable for the results they put into that final report. So you cannot delegate liability or accountability for the result. Moving on to 1A, Part 2, Types of Audits, Assessments, and Reviews. And before we get into the details, I want to level set on a very important term you're going to hear several times in the next few minutes to make sure you are absolutely clear on its meaning, and that is assurance. Assurance is the level of confidence and trust that an organization's systems, processes, and controls are effective in protecting information assets, managing risks, and ensuring compliance with relevant standards and policies. The who, how, and what of an audit or assessment will absolutely affect confidence. We'll get into answering why that is so right now. So it begins with selecting the right lens for our efforts. So let's talk through the types of audits, assessments, and reviews. These are really a continuum of assurance. They provide varying levels of assurance based on the nature of the exercise. Audits, for example, are highest assurance. They are formal opinions against established criteria, such as a compliance audit. Assessments are less formal. They are internal focus, which identify risks and gaps. Typically, let's say in the financial services industry, we have a federally mandated annual information security audit, but we will go through multiple assessments of varying types throughout the course of the year to ensure that our controls remain effective and we are ready to pass that federal audit. And then there are reviews. These are limited assurance. They're less extensive testing than a full audit. So for the exam, just know that the choice depends on the level of assurance stakeholders require. If we need to do a spot check to make sure that we are compliant in a particular area and our executive sponsorship is looking for a quick opinion, we can bring together an internal assessment or review rather than going outside the organization for a formal audit. So let's talk about the different types of audit engagements you should know for the exam. There are several. There are compliance audits, which assess the organization's adherence to laws, regulations, and policies, such as GDPR, PCI DSS, HIPAA for the healthcare industry. A financial audit, which focuses on accuracy of financial reporting and supporting IT controls. An operational audit, which focuses on efficiency and effectiveness of operations. An integrated audit combines financial and information security or operational audit objectives. We'd see this with a Sarbanes-Oxley audit. An information security audit. This is going to focus on, as the name implies, information security, which means the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. And a forensic audit will investigate fraud or crime and focus on gathering legal evidence. We have a third-party service audit, which audits outsourced processes, resulting in a service auditor's report, often a SOC report that the organization's auditor can rely on. And sometimes third parties will make that SOC 2 report available on demand. For example, your major cloud service providers, your Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, they will offer a SOC 2 Type 2 report on demand that you can download from their website after signing an NDA that provides assurance that they have the appropriate controls in place for a given service. And that SOC 2 Type 2 report actually measures those controls over a period of time. So it's high assurance. A computer forensic audit. This is a specialized investigation of electronic devices to gather and preserve evidence for legal proceedings. So the person performing that type of audit will have to be well versed in the volatility of evidence. So they'll know which evidence to collect first on a computer because it is volatile. It may disappear over time or with a shutdown or reboot. A functional audit is an independent evaluation of a software product to verify that its functionality and performance meet specified requirements. And then a readiness assessment. That's a review of an organization's current state of compliance against a standard, focusing on control design to identify gaps before a formal audit. So what is a control self-assessment? This is a management technique where business units assess their own control environments. What's the purpose? To increase control awareness and ownership within the business. It identifies risks and control gaps early, so well before we have an external auditor coming in, and it serves as a valuable input for the internal audit function. So the auditor's role here is as a facilitator for CSA workshops and processes, not as the one performing the assessment. The auditor is guiding the organization in appropriately executing their own self-assessment, so kind of training the business units in how to effectively assess their own controls. So moving on to 1A3, risk-based auditing. Let's start with the core principle of risk-based audit planning. So the core principle here is to concentrate audit resources on areas that pose the greatest risk to the organization's objective. So as an auditor, we are taking a risk-based approach. The benefits here include efficiency because we avoid wasting time on low-risk areas. That's one of the important elements of planning we talked about. And effectiveness. It provides the most relevant assurance to leadership because we are focused on the highest risk areas. Remember, for the exam, the first step in any risk-based audit is to understand the business. We want to make sure that we are focusing our audit efforts on the areas of the business that are critical to the business, that we're not distracted, that is to say, by unimportant details. Let's talk about short-term versus long-term audit planning. So when we talk about short-term planning, we're talking about audit issues to be covered during the current year. This forms the basis for the annual audit plan. And then we have long-term planning, which considers strategic changes in the organization's IT environment and direction, and aligns the audit function with the long-term goals of the business. So looking out beyond a year. From a process perspective, this analysis should occur at least annually and be updated for significant changes, such as acquisitions or new regulations. And the plan has to be approved by the audit committee. So when, as an auditor, we perform that annual analysis, if we see significant changes that justify a change in scope or direction, we take that to the audit committee as a recommendation. So let's talk about the effect of laws and regulations on planning. So we have a responsibility here as an auditor. As an IS auditor, you have to identify all applicable laws, regulations, and contractual requirements relevant to the audit. That's an important part of the planning process. And these external requirements will directly impact the audit scope and the audit objectives. So if we discover that, for example, we're auditing a system with sensitive information for customers in the EU, in the European Union, then GDPR applies. So that's going to necessarily change our audit scope. So let's talk about the steps. We begin by identifying and documenting applicable laws and regulations, data privacy, e-commerce, industry-specific rules such as healthcare, banking, or other regulated industry. We assess if management has incorporated these requirements into policies and procedures. We review internal documents and contracts for adherence. So you won't be asked about specific laws on the exam, but you will be tested on how you would audit for compliance with them. So you're not going to be asked to recite any specific element of GDPR, for example, but you should know that it impacts data privacy for companies who have customers in the European Union, so they are subject to GDPR regulations. If you're dealing with a credit card processor, PCI DSS applies to those organizations. So you'll need to have high-level knowledge of this. If you've already passed the CISSP or CISM exams, I would expect you have all the high-level knowledge you need. I will include an addendum link for you in CISA The Last Mile, the moment that's published later this month. So for the exam, you'll also want to make sure you know the steps in the audit planning lifecycle. So it always begins by understanding the business, defining the audit universe, all potential auditable entities. We perform a risk assessment. We identify threats and vulnerabilities, and we prioritize the high-risk areas. As an auditor, we always take a risk-based approach. We identify existing controls. What has management done to mitigate the high risks? What controls are in place? And we determine residual risk. So how much risk is left after the controls are considered? And then we develop the audit plan. We define the scope, the objectives, and the resources based on that residual risk. We're focusing on high-risk areas of important business assets. And we get that plan approved by the audit committee. So audit risk is the risk of issuing an incorrect audit opinion, saying controls are effective when in fact they are not. You may see materiality come up on the exam. This is the importance or significance of an item in the context of the enterprise as a whole. An error is material if it could influence the decisions of stakeholders. There is a formula for calculating audit risk. It is the inherent risk times the control risk times the detection risk. So this formula will only make sense if you understand the definition of each of these three types of risk. I want you to be very familiar with these different types of risks, so let's take a quick sidebar and talk through some definitions. So we have inherent risk, which I mentioned is the risk level or exposure before controls have been implemented. We have control risk, which is the risk of a material error that would not be prevented or detected on a timely basis by the system of internal controls. We have detection risk, which is the risk that material errors or misstatements will not be detected by an information security auditor. And then residual risk, the risk that remains after controls have been implemented. So just finishing up here, the key relationship is that there is an inverse relationship between materiality and audit risk. So if an area is highly material, meaning very important, the acceptable level of risk is low, meaning the auditor must perform more rigorous testing. So I've also laid out a reference table for you here with inherent, control, detection, and residual risk, and who is responsible for each of these to help with your memorization for exam day, just to make sure you understand how these map to the various roles. All right, moving into 1A4, types of controls and considerations. So let's talk about the types of controls and the considerations that go with each. So what is a control? Well, it's a policy, procedure, practice, or organizational structure. So it provides a reasonable assurance, it provides confidence, trust that business objectives will be achieved. It prevents, detects, or corrects undesired events. The control objective is the specific goal a control is designed to achieve. For example, ensuring only authorized users can access the payroll system. The control objective is only met if authorized users are the only people who access that system successfully. So let's talk about control frameworks. Now, ISACA's primary framework is COBIT. It is the framework that is maintained by ISACA, Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies. It provides a comprehensive model for IT governance and management. Now, there are other frameworks that you are going to encounter in your life as an auditor. You should be aware of these other frameworks. The Center for Internet Security has controls. They have operating system benchmarks that are frequently used in the industry. OWASP has the top 10 web app security vulnerabilities that are well known around the industry. Just the tip of the iceberg for them as well. We have PCI DSS. These are requirements for protecting payment card data. The big four credit card companies actually developed these, and they are contractually implemented, not implemented through any government regulations, making them a bit unique in that respect. And then finally, the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA, has the Cloud Controls Matrix, which is a framework for cloud computing security. We need to go a bit further into controls. So let's talk about the difference between general controls and application controls. So general controls, or IT general controls, apply to the entire IT environment. So this would mean data centers, networks, operating systems, etc., the technology, right? It provides the foundation for the overall control structure. So for example, change management, logical access policies, disaster recovery, 3 good examples. Application controls are specific to a particular software application or business process. It ensures data is complete, accurate, and valid as it's processed. So we can classify controls by their function, and you should be familiar with control classifications for the exam. So there are preventive controls, such as a firewall or data encryption. Detective controls, which identify an incident after it's occurred. So it detects, it's in the name really. System logs, intrusion detection, system alerts. Corrective controls remediate the impact of an incident after it's occurred, of course. So an incident response plan or data backups. Deterrent controls deter or discourage behavior, such as an individual who might be thinking about causing an incident. So warning signs and banners can deter or discourage unwanted behavior. Directive controls mandate or direct or steer desired behavior. Policies, laws, just general instructive signs placed around a building. Compensating controls. These are alternate controls that are implemented when a primary control is not feasible. For example, if my web developer fails to implement input validation on their web form, that web form is going to be vulnerable to a SQL injection attack. A compensating control would be a web application firewall that protects against the OWASP top 10 web vulnerabilities and would thus provide protection against a lack of poor secure coding practices. The exam tip I want to leave you with here is preventive controls are the most effective and desirable type because they prevent an incident from occurring in the first place. And we can also classify our controls by implementation. So there are administrative controls, also called managerial controls. These are soft controls focused on people and processes. These would include policies, procedures, and security awareness training, for example. Technical controls, also called logical controls, are implemented in hardware or software, in technology. Examples here would include access control lists, like we might see in a firewall, data encryption, antivirus software, intrusion detection or prevention systems. And physical controls. These are controls that protect the physical environment. Examples here include fences, locks, security guards, and fire suppression. So let's talk about management control monitoring. First, what is it? Well, this is management's own process for monitoring the effectiveness of controls separate from a formal audit. The purpose is to identify control deviations in a timely manner, and this allows management to then take proactive corrective action, and it drives continuous improvement of the security program because we are monitoring and correcting and improving as necessary. The auditor's role here is to review the results of management's monitoring efforts as part of their evaluation of the control environment. So let's connect the dots here. So standards and ethics we talked about in section 1, so 1A1, and together these provide the foundation of our profession. This is the foundation that mandates a risk-based approach. The risk assessment we discussed evaluates the organization's controls, and the business objectives and risks determine the type of audit needed. And for the exam, just to really distill the CISA mindset for you, you really need to think about this the ISACA way. Always prioritize business risk over purely technical issues. ISACA is really focused on business first, that information security, for example, exists to serve the business. That's what we hear on the CISM exam. And the auditor role from an ISACA perspective always prioritizes the business. Your role as the auditor is you provide assurance. You do not implement controls. You are evaluating the efficacy, the effectiveness. You do not implement the controls. Your first step is always understand the business context. For the exam, when you hit the practice questions, really just practice. Use scenario-based questions to master the application of these concepts. I think they're pretty straightforward once you practice for a bit, and you should be in good shape. And my friends, that's what I have for you in Domain 1 Part A. I'll be back with Domain 1 Part B in just 2 or 3 days. And I'll look forward to any questions you have. You can drop them in the comments, reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to field those anywhere we connect. And until next time, take care and stay safe.